Path of Exile 3.15 Expedition League is going to be making some of the largest changes to character power that we have seen potentially ever. And due to this, the meta, according to GGG, is going to be massively shaken up, and builds that were good before potentially might not be builds that are good now. So in this video, I'm going to give you an idea about how all of the different changes that we're going to be getting are going to affect each and every type of build, and give you the tools that you need to be able to tell, hey, is this build that I was planning on doing for League Start actually going to be a good idea? You'll find all that out in this video. Hey guys, remember that if you're enjoying this content, make sure that you like the video so that other people can enjoy it as well. And if you're part of the large percentage of people who are still not subscribed to this YouTube channel, make sure that you do that so that these videos will show right up in your feed. You can always change your mind later. I greatly appreciate all your support. Let's get back into the video. Now don't worry too much, I'm sure that your favorite build will most likely be fine as long as it's not one of those high DPS meme builds that literally only invests in damage and nothing else, looking at you BFBB Inquisitor. And if you're worried about my builds, I'm going to be making another video that's going to be talking about all the other builds that I didn't cover in my League Star videos this time, so don't worry, you'll get some information about that. Now I did cover most of this and I gave some kind of examples over my Twitch stream at twitch.tv/BigDucks, which you should go follow by the way. However, due to these massive changes to gems, we really don't 100% know what the meta is actually going to be. This is probably the first time that I think the meta is going to get a significant shift. A lot of the old guard are going to be taken out back and going to be gone from the meta, so we're hopefully going to get some new and interesting choices that we can make going forward. There's a bunch of new skills. It should be pretty interesting. However, what you're interested in, you've got this build that you're dying to play and you're wondering, is this really going to be a good choice for 3.15? Well, let's go over a few things. The first thing is going to be gem changes. Now, gems got a pretty significant change in that I'm going to read this directly from GGG. This is a quote from their balance manifesto. Damage multipliers between support gems have been standardized following these rules. The first rule is that gems that provide a useful benefit in addition to damage usually grant less than 25% more damage at gem level 20. This is not a huge nerf, but think about things that give you like some kind of added bonus as well as the thing that they do. Think like hypothermia, or think things like inspiration support. These are going to be the kinds of gems that get affected by this one. They tended to not give that much damage for the most part, so it should be okay. The next rule is that those gems that provide only a damage bonus or have a very mild restriction or penalty grant around 30 to 35% more damage. So if your build uses a lot of just pure damage supports, it's going to get hit in the damage department pretty hard. Now, if your build already did ridiculous amounts of damage, I'm talking like 10 million plus, you're probably going to be completely fine here, even if you use all damage supports and you get completely nerfed, because 4 or 5 million DPS, let's face it, as long as you actually can do that much damage consistently, is plenty. And the last rule is that those with downsides or restrictions grant between 38 and 48% more damage, depending on how severe the cost of using this support is. Now, this is the important one, and I think this is what you should really be looking at when you're trying to find out a build to play. So these are going to be things that have like a pretty significant downside. Think like controlled destruction or things like that. They also are going to be adding downsides to some gems that they didn't add before, like supposedly melee Fizz support is going to be getting an attack speed nerf to it for some reason, but there's going to be things like this all over the place. So make sure that you do go and check the patch notes, check the balance manifesto, and see if your particular build and your particular skills that you're using are going to, you know, get a ton of nerfs or are going to only get a few nerfs. Now let me give you a kind of an example. So we're going to use Creeping Frost Occultist versus Burning Arrow. Now Creeping Frost actually has quite a few gems that are going to be in this downsides or restrictions section, and also some that are going to be in the gems that provide a useful benefit in addition to damage. Most of the gems that Creeping Frost are going to be in those sections, which are the ones that are getting least nerfed out of everything. It doesn't use very many things that are going to be like just pure damage multipliers. It's mainly supporting type ones or things that are, you know, massive downsides. And the bonus to this is that if your build doesn't suffer from those downsides, like Creeping Frost uses elemental focus, and it doesn't matter that we can't apply elemental ailments with our main ability because the ground effect still works, and it uses things like controlled destruction. We don't crit, so we just use it for the spell damage, so it's not actually going to affect us that much. These kinds of things are going to be significantly better for that kind of build. Now let's talk about Burning Arrow instead. Now Burning Arrow does use a couple support gems like elemental damage with attacks that is just a straight solid damage gem. If your build is going to be using a lot of just pure damage gems, it might be getting nerfed a little bit more than everything else, so just keep that in mind, that you may want to consider swapping some of the support gems going forward, because there may be more interesting options for your build now that these Just huge damage percentage gems have been kind of nerfed down. Now, if your build was already underperforming a little bit, but you still really want to play it, make sure to go double check, because there is going to be a ton of abilities, mainly melee abilities, that are getting compensation for some of these nerfs, so that they don't just become worse than everything else. There's going to be a pretty big list of stuff that's being buffed up, so make sure that you go take a look, and if your build has that in it, then maybe it'll be okay. Now, the next major thing that's being changed is going to be flasks. Flasks are very important for a lot of builds. There are some builds that literally survive just specifically off of their flasks. Now, we don't truly know how major this is going to be. We don't know exactly what the difference in power is going to be of flasks. We don't know if they're going to be completely useless a lot of the time. We don't know if they're going to be absolutely still completely overpowered. I'm leaning towards that. Until we actually play in the league and see how these different changes affect gameplay and such, we're really not going to be able to 100% know whether or not these changes are going to have significant impacts on certain builds. However, there are a few things that you can take a look at and figure out right now. So one thing to keep in mind is that unique flasks have all gotten a balance pass, and they have brought up some that were underperforming and brought down some that were overperforming. And there's also going to be some interesting enchantments that can go on some of these flasks. Like there's one that gives like 90% increased duration, and that could work pretty well with certain things like replica roomies and stuff like that. Should be pretty interesting, like on a Juggernaut build that uses replica roomies, and you get like massive increased duration on that flask, and that makes it so that you can actually have all of the upsides and very few of the downsides. So take a look at your build. If it's got a bunch of unique flasks, make sure that you check the patch notes to see what those actual changes are going to be, and hopefully it's not going to affect it too much. Now, there is one flask change that is actually going to disproportionately affect a lot of builds more than other ones, and that's going to be the Diamond Flask nerf. Now, Diamond Flask before was the saving grace of a lot of lower level crit builds. Unfortunately, this change isn't really going to affect builds that are already very good at critting. Think like Assassins or think like Inquisitors. This is going to affect things like Duelist Ascendancies, like Gladiator, Slayer, and Champion. Any of those builds that just kind of use crit as their secondary scaling to get up into higher levels of damage, they tend to majorly have problems with getting crit chance. Crit multiplier tends to be pretty easy to get. You can use things like Abyssus, crit multiplier jewels. There's lots of things that give crit multi. Crit chance is a little bit harder to come by sometimes. It's mainly based off of your weapon and just any raw crit chance that you can get anywhere else. There's not a lot of it. So Diamond Flasks previously were very good for builds that got right around 50% crit chance, which is about what you could afford on one of these builds. They now give 100% increased crit chance, which is still good, but it's not going to be the same as it was before. So just keep in mind, if you're using a build that just barely has enough crit, double check PUB after it gets updated to make sure that everything's going to be good. Now, the last change to Flasks is going to be how they deal with ailments, and this is going to make builds that can actually go ailment immune or unaffected by ailments significantly stronger going forward. Now, Ascendancies like the Raider have lost some of their ailment immunity. Like the Raider, for example, only has 50% chance to avoid elemental ailments now from their one path. You can support this with things on the skill tree or getting items that have ailment avoidance and get back up to 100%, and this may be something that you really want to do, because Flasks, they don't remove ailments as easily anymore. You actually have to remove the ailment to get immunity, and the immunity is only for 1 second. So builds that actually can become ailment immune are going to be pretty powerful. Think things like the Occultist is going to be chill and freeze immune, which is going to be really solid. Things like the Raider is going to have that 50% avoidance, which is going to be pretty solid. Also keep in mind that there are going to be no flasks that allow you to just become immune to curses anymore. You'll be able to remove them with a flask, but never become immune. So maps that have curses on them, if you can somehow otherwise get reduced effective curses on you, like say there's a bunch of totem builds that do that, or you can get unaffected by curses by using like that shield off of Aziri, that might be a really, really powerful mechanic now. Now, another change that's going slightly under the radar is going to be these trigger changes. There are a lot of builds out there that level almost specifically just using Spellslinger, and now that Spellslinger is going to be requiring mana to cast those abilities as well on top of everything else, you might want to reconsider some of the links and such that you use for Spellslinger. However, there is an interesting side effect of this. Now you are going to be able to use Archmage to actually be able to spell sling Archmage spells, since it is going to cost mana now, and Reap, which previously you couldn't stack up the charges on it due to not being able to actually spend life on it. Reap is going to be able to be spell slung now and get the benefits of Reap itself. So builds like the Exsanguinate build that I put out, which I'm probably not going to be putting a build guide out for right now just because I'm Not positive if the changes are going to affect it enough or not. I'll talk more about that a little bit later when we talk about damage over time multiplier, but there's enough changes that might put that build up in the air. It needs a little bit more testing going into 3.15. Another thing of interest is going to be cast when damage taken is now going to require mana. So builds that have very, very super low mana pools might be having a little bit of a rough time. However, I would assume that there are going to be easy ways to overcome this. You're just going to have to spend more and invest more in things that reduce the mana cost of skills, because this should theoretically reduce the mana cost of the triggered skill as well. This will be important on builds like the Toxic Rain Raider, where we use an Asinus Chant helmet that casts a whole bunch of skills. That build already uses a lot of minus mana cost of non-channel abilities, so adding something like a Replica Conqueror's Efficiency to your build might be a pretty big boon for any kind of triggering build. So just keep that in mind, that you're going to need to account for mana on triggered builds going forward. Now, the last thing to talk about, and this does affect my builds quite a bit because I use a lot of damage over time in most of my build guides, is that Cluster Jewels, specifically mediums if I read correctly, are getting some pretty substantial nerfs. Now, there's going to be a lot of these. Most of them are going to get some pretty sizable nerfs, and it will make it kind of up in the air whether or not medium Cluster Jewels are going to be super worth it for these damage over time builds. It's said that they're going to try to bring them more in line with other medium clusters, so maybe it's not that big of a deal. I will be updating all of my personal build guides with the best recommendations that I can get, looking at patch notes and seeing what everything that we have, so don't worry too much about that. The 3 builds that I am going to be putting out all work without almost any of those medium cluster jewels, so it should be mostly fine. I'm not too personally worried, but if your build uses a lot of medium clusters, think things like physical damage over time mediums, think like a bleeding bow character, or like a exsanguinate type character, or a corrupting blood type character. If your build uses a lot of these damage over time mediums, like a substantial amount of them, I would be a little bit worried, and I would double check before you really decide on that as your league starter. And that is going to be it for the video. Now, if you have any further questions, or you want to talk with other people about maybe a new build that you're trying to create and want to get some feedback on it, come join my Discord, link down in the description. And if I happen to be live over at twitch.tv/BigDucks, make sure that you come follow and hang out with me and the boys. I'm live Monday through Friday, 11 to 4 Eastern, and probably more than that coming up into the next expansion. You can come hang out with me. I'd be happy to answer some questions for you, or you can just come hang out and chill with the stream. And remember, boys, if you enjoy this content, make sure to like the video so that others can see it as well. Subscribe to the YouTube channel for more content similar to this, and stay safe out there in Ray class. And I will see you guys in the next video.